Brace yourself for something fuel-nominal. Unleaded 88 is the clear fuel choice. It's cheaper, cleaner, and greener. And it's grown by Iowa corn farmers. Now that's totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88.
Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne.
And I'm Liam Billingham.
And today's film is John Woo's 1992 masterpiece. Hard Boiled. It's Die Hard in a Hospital.
Die Hard in a Hospital.
Where do we start?
Oh my God, Phil. Let's start with John Woo.
Okay.
How do we feel about John Woo? How do you feel about John Woo? Phil,
Yes.
how do you feel about John Woo?
Reverential.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, I almost can't articulate how much I'm in awe of this man. And you know, the other thing I think is so interesting about John Woo, by the way, if his life story is very interesting, and he had a pretty hard life. But one of the things I think is so interesting about him is if you think about a lot of the great action directors, which I want to talk about later, like James Cameron, Michael Bay, Tony Scott, right? Guys like that who are these forceful personalities, alpha guys. McTiernan, you know, and many more that we'll talk about. But John Woo is like the opposite. Like their personalities match the movies they make to some extent.
Yeah.
They're these big, larger-than-life, bombastic personalities. And John Woo is this sort of soft-spoken,
intellectual,
gentle
kind of
like
poet. He's
sweet.
a poet. He's a poet.
You know, and I love that disparity. And I think his sort of sweetness and sensitivity and spirituality as well comes through in the most violent bloodfests you've ever seen. That's what makes them transcendent.
I was texting a buddy about this film the other day, and he was like, yeah, John Woo is a poet. And so I think it's worth saying that John Woo, who we'll call the poet of action cinema, started his career in Hong Kong, made a couple amazing movies, A Better Tomorrow Part 2, The Killer, Hard Boiled, before getting invited to Hollywood and making, among others, Hard Target,
Broken Arrow,
Face Off,
the daddy,
just the Mac Daddy of John Woo American films, Wind Talkers, Paycheck, and then went back to Hong Kong and made films like Red Cliff, and is making now a few other films, and is this film, but particularly John Woo, is my entry in a lot of ways into foreign cinema.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask about like how did you come across and discover Hong Kong cinema and John Woo and Ringo Lam?
I think a big part of this is honestly Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
So like many a young man in his early teenage years, I was pretty into. I liked Pulp Fiction, but I was really into Reservoir Dogs. Reservoir Dogs was like my jam, and in reading about Reservoir Dogs, I discovered that it was inspired by City on Fire, the Ringo Lam film and so reading a little bit about City on Fire, I could not find a copy of City on Fire. This was the heady days of 1994, probably. But the video store that I frequented and eventually worked at, and a surprise to no one, had a copy of The Killer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I rented and watched The Killer, and I was like, wow. And that also coincided with Broken Arrow, which is a movie that I think is just a really great, really fun action movie. Die Hard in the Canyon and
Die Hard in the Desert.
Die Hard in the Desert, that's good. And Face Off, which is really, 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 really like I think a totally perfect. Like I remember seeing Face Off and being like, this movie is a revelation.
It's like action cinema at its zenith,
right? It really is,
and it's John Woo like It was almost like I love Hard Target, I love Broken Arrow, but they were almost sort of stepping stones to make Face Off. I think in the way that some might say like A Better Tomorrow and The Killer were stepping stones to make Hard Boiled.
Yeah,
you know? I mean, there's many more great movies that John Woo made, Bullet in the Head, and a bunch of others. I don't want to be reductive to his filmography, but my personal opinion is that I love Hard Boiled more than Face Off, and I love Face Off, and I would almost, and this is going to be controversial.
Wait, you heard it here.
Hard Boiled might be a better action movie than Die Hard.
What? No, I texted you this while watching it the other night. Phil, is this the greatest movie ever made? This is an interesting moment. We're talking about, Hong Kong cinema, these kinds of things. And, you said Die Hard in a hospital, but which, the second hour of this movie takes place in a hospital. And I think we can break down the plot a little bit. But it's also maybe interesting to think about it as Die Hard in a gun fu movie,
yes.
which is one way that people describe sort of John Woo's cinema, where the action, and we'll get into this more in the section, is the guns are not treated like they are in other American action films in particular. They're treated in a very, very different way. I mean, which I want to save for the action section, but my jaw was, I hadn't seen this movie in a long time. It's a movie I remember watching for the first time, which is significant because when I was 13, 14, I watched a lot of movies, but I remember turning this movie on and being like, what is this? No American movie could ever touch this. And I don't even necessarily mean in terms of quality. I just mean no one makes movies.
There's just nothing like it,
There's
right?
nothing like it.
It's
I'm
unique, distinct, just an extraordinary, exuberant, thrilling, exhilarating, nonstop. It's a masterpiece.
It's also like energetic, beautiful, highly
Soulful,
melodramatic. It's sort of like, oh yeah, it's thematically rich, even though you don't spend a lot of time thinking about like what it's about, but it's about a multitude of different things, and I think hugely influential in terms of you can just see everyone referencing it after the fact. Not
but
only
no
in
one
movies,
can
in
come
video
close,
games.
I don't think.
I don't know if you remember, there was a Die Hard trilogy game for the
I played
PlayStation.
it.
Me too.
Yeah,
I thought
yeah,
it was
it was awesome.
It was really
It was
fun.
really good.
It was really good.
Yeah.
And it was all three Die Hard movies in one CD, right? And the first one that takes place in Nakatomi, you play John McClane running around, and the camera, so to speak, the game was the third person behind him as he walked down the hallway. And this movie does that in a sequence. So you can feel the influence this had on video
James
games.
Cameron would do that a lot, particularly in True Lies. It's a technique that I find particularly exhilarating when the camera is behind, like if there's an assault happening, like the sequence in this movie where the motorcycles go and attack the gun stash at the docks, and the camera is behind the sort of attacking forces, and you feel like you're part of it. So actually, it's probably the precursor to that. It's probably Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, that's good.
The helicopter assault sequence where you actually are sort of swept up in it, and even though what's happening in that film is absolutely appalling, with the Wagner music and everything, you almost can't help but get swept up in it. And if you can put it in a situation like, True Lies does it in a situation where you're sort of morally in sync with the attackers, there's just something about that where you feel like you're there, you're part of it. And it's part of, where you place the camera. It sounds an obvious thing to say, but it's so important, particularly, I think, with action. And that can be the difference between just watching shit happen dispassionately and feeling swept up in the events of the movie.
And you are absolutely swept up in this movie. So, quickly, before we jump into our top-line facts about Hard Boiled, this is not an easy movie to find. You might not have seen it in a while. I hadn't seen it in 22 years. So I'm going to try to rattle off a quick plot description, which is that there's a police officer named Tequila, played by Chow Yun-fat, the greatest movie star of all time, except maybe Harrison Ford, but we can talk about that later, who at the beginning of the film's partner is killed during a shootout between rival gangs at a tea party, and Tequila vows revenge for the death of his partner. He begins to pursue a gangster. Meanwhile, his, romantic partner, Teresa, who also is a police officer, is receiving messages from a cop deep undercover, Alan, played by Tony Leung, and eventually these two unlikely partners will come together to defeat the gangsters at the center of the story and uncover a weapons cache held in a hospital. That only scratches the surface of what is a movie with four of the greatest action sequences of all time.
I think it's worth talking about the quote-unquote heroic bloodshed genre which this film falls into briefly, because I would say, like, in my opinion, to some extent, the plot is almost like the plot's important and there's a lot of back and forth and twists and turns, but it's less important than the style of the film.
Right.
It's less important than the mood of the film. And
It's vibes. This movie is vibes.
It's total. Yeah. It's like the plot, you don't even necessarily have to follow the plot.
Right.
Even though the plot is actually quite interesting and quite compelling, but it's
Well,
more
it's almost
about
episodic too as a movie, right? Like it has these episodes. There's a story going through it, but there are jumps in time a little bit, and like there's ebbs and flows. It's not straight plot the entire film.
So the heroic bloodshed genre, it was coined by the editor Rick Baker in the magazine Eastern Heroes in the late 80s, specifically referring to the styles of John Woo and Ringo Lam, who directed City on Fire, which we mentioned earlier. And he defined it as a Hong Kong action film that features a lot of gunplay and gangsters rather than kung fu. Lots of blood, lots of action. My personal, like, how I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, how would I define it? How would I define the vibe, to use your word? It's mythic, romantic, exaggerated, sentimental action sagas with a wild disregard for human life and yet the utmost compassion for the human condition.
And it's melodramatic, but in a way, operatic is even better.
Yeah.
Like this movie is not subtle, but to
subtlety.
John, well, sure, and to John Woo's
this isn't
credit,
an indie movie. This is action, baby.
It's also weirdly believable in spite of how insane it is. And I think that is really, really amazing. And we should say that, like, there's a whole history to Hong Kong cinema and martial arts, and that's a whole other. There are experts who can talk about that stuff, but I think you can even draw a connection between this and like Breathless, the Jean-Luc Godard movie from the 60s about gangsters. Like, it feels very modern in that it uses the sort of like, what are traditional things in Hong Kong cinema, but does them in this new, cool, jazzy, high action style that is influenced as much by European and American cinema as it is by Hong Kong cinema. It's a world film. Its influences are from all over the world.
There's Western vibes, and I believe Le Samurai was a big influence on
Melville.
The Killer,
oh,
right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you would know a lot about.
I love Le Samurai.
About that. Great movie. I believe it's on HBO Max right now. I just want to touch briefly on my cultural intersection with this because, like you, I was a huge Tarantino fan, and in the UK, post Tarantino, this really caught on in a huge way. And I actually feel like Tarantino specifically made people more curious about film in general and world cinema.
Yeah, totally true.
And because he was such a sort of cultural magpie that took all of these different things and then reinvented it and made it completely his own thing. But there were influences of French New Wave and Hong Kong cinema and, all different types of filmmaking styles. And
can I touch on something quickly?
Sure.
Which is the French New Wave is the era, the early 1960s, more or less, that began in France by a bunch of filmmakers who started as critics, writing for Cahiers du Cinéma, like Jean-Luc Godard, who recently passed away, Francois Truffaut, and Jean-Luc Godard there's a famous quote from him, which is, all you need to make a movie is a girl and a gun.
Mm-hmm. And this film has that.
And this film has that in spades. And he made this film called Breathless, which, if you've never seen it, is hugely influential to every movie that came after it. I didn't think we were going to end up discussing Jean-Luc Godard here, but it's totally applicable. It kind of made gangsters cool in movies, right? And, that would influence, obviously, Tarantino. It would obviously influence John Woo. Everyone is influenced by this movie. If you've never seen it, you can draw a line between Breathless and
But the interesting thing about that is that with early John Woo films, such as A Better Tomorrow, which I was a huge fan of, and The Killer, because they had glamorized gangsters, and he took a bit of criticism for that, even though it's in that tradition of French New Wave and what have you, this was a film where he intentionally wanted to glamorize the police, and his influences were things like Bullet, the Steve McQueen movie, and Dirty Harry, and what have you. So this was actually a response to some of the criticism that he was given for glamorizing
Do you
gangsters.
think this is a big thing. I have a lot of thoughts about what this movie says about the police, not in terms of like pro or negative, but just this like absolutely kaleidoscopic relationship to identity and who's who in this movie that's really, really fascinating
And that's another
to me.
classic Wu theme of good and evil being two sides of the same coin, and the blurred lines of morality between cops and criminals, and honor and betrayal and loyalty. And I mean, it's fascinating. Just to finish the point I wanted to just make about how this was perceived in the UK, because I remember going to those stores like HMV, and your equivalent would be Virgin Megastores.
Virgin
I guess, and things
Megastores,
like, well,
right.
The post-Tarantino, HMV, Virgin Megastores, etc., they were stacked with Hong Kong action movies.
Oh, it was a huge thing.
It was a big deal. It really, really took off. And I love this movie. It's my favorite of all of them. And I was really into it at that time, especially, City on Fire, The
Did
Killer,
you own
Better
it?
Tomorrow.
Where did you first see it? Did you rent it? Did you buy a copy? What was your...
It would have been on VHS. I had a friend at school who was also quite into world cinema and would, I think he may have lent it to me, actually. Yeah. And then I bought it and never looked back. Yeah, I mean...
Phil, if a Hong Kong cinema enthusiast has searched Hard Boiled in their podcast app of choice, and they've discovered Die Hard on a Blank, and maybe they don't... Hi, take
Thanks
a
for
seat. Please put your double-plated guns away. What does the term Die Hard on a Blank mean?
So Die Hard on a Blank is cultural shorthand for any action movie that utilizes this particular storytelling paradigm of bad guys take over a blank bus, boat, in this case, hospital, and it's up to one man or woman to fight back. In this case, there's obviously variations on this. In this case, it's two cops, etc. But that's broadly the meaning of the term. This show is all about studying the influence of Die Hard across action cinema through all of those films that were direct Die Hard on a Blank style direct imitators, but Die Hard's DNA spread everywhere in a myriad of ways. So we're tracking that one movie at a time in chronological order from Die Hard onwards. So this movie was released on April 16th, 1992 in Hong Kong. That was approximately 4 months after our last film, The Last Boy Scout, which came out on December 12th, 1991.
Phil, quick. Last Boy Scout or Hard Boiled?
Why? Why would you do that to me? Why?
It's Hard Boiled. I'm sorry, it's Hard Boiled.
No, you know what? I would do what he does at the end of the film, but I'm not going to spoil what that is. What that is. I would do what Tony Leung does at the end of the film.
Wow.
To avoid making that choice.
You really love movies.
All right, so Hard Boiled would, after its Hong Kong release, it would play at the Toronto Film Festival in September 1992. It later received a limited US release, but this was the movie that really drew Hollywood's attention to John Woo in a huge way. So it was directed by John Woo, it's produced by Linda Cook and Terrence Chang. It stars Chow Yun-fat, Tony Leung, and Teresa Mo. The screenplay was by Gordon Chan and Barry Wong, based on a story by John Woo. The budget's a little complicated. So it's an estimated budget of $4.5 million in US
How did this
dollars.
movie only cost $4.5 million?
Incredible.
It looks like it cost $150 million.
And actually, it grossed $19.7 million in Hong Kong dollars on initial release, but actually was less of a success than his previous movies. Apparently, the zeitgeist at the time, the taste there was more towards, they wanted comedies and romances, and they were kind of a bit done with this. So the timing, I guess, kind of worked out because John Woo was then able to make his transition to Hollywood.
Well, he's a great example of someone who put his print on, I'd be curious, I'm sure you know, but we don't have to get into now, sort of a history of John Woo's Hollywood experience. Because, he made some real kick-ass movies. He made some movies that I think were probably a little challenged by the way movies are made or the studio system here. He's an interesting guy in terms of his relationship to Hollywood. Have you seen Manhunt, the movie he made in 2017?
No.
Oh, it's on Netflix.
Is it good?
I think it's good. This is a bit of a digression, but there's a moment at the beginning of the film where a man in a suit walks into a tea shop. And he looks around and he goes, really, this happens. This is reminding me something.
Oh, wow. He's doing
from a time long ago. And then he pulls out two guns and starts shooting.
Wow.
It's so meta, which John Woo is a little meta at times. He's in this movie, for example. Yeah. But it's I loved it. I mean, I loved it because I was like, John Woo is back making movies where like people get shot.
There's a weird thing seems to be going on with that. Like that happens in Ambulance as well, where it references his own movies.
Yeah, it is really weird. You know, one movie we didn't mention that John Woo directed is Mission Impossible 2.
Yes,
which is a pretty fascinating movie, and definitely a product of an auteur filmmaker.
It's funny, yeah. I almost don't think of it because it's part of a franchise, and I think you can see his flourishes, but it feels less of a typical John Woo film, and the story of that film is kind of like there's some real problems with that film,
and yet it's absolutely John Woo. It might be like a little, and this is not a criticism. I like that movie. It might be a little watered down Woo, but there's definitely some Woo in the DNA of that movie. I think there's a lot. You're right. I think there's some things about that movie that don't work, but there's also a lot to recommend it. And I think it was just the coolest thing in the world when Tom Cruise was like, "We're gonna get John Woo to direct the second Mission Impossible movie."
Yeah,
like, that's rad.
Yeah,
you know, that's the coolest.
When
thing.
I was at university, when the Limp Bizkit song came on, that was everyone's cue to race to the dance floor from Mission Impossible 2. That's dating.
Yeah, you really.
All right, so Die Hard DNA.
Die Hard DNA. What are we going to do in this segment, Phil?
Well, in Die Hard DNA, we talk about all the different elements and influences, be it personnel, premise or otherwise, from Die Hard that have found their way into the film in question.
So kind of how this film, what are the elements of Die Hard that we can see intentionally or unintentionally in this movie? It's kind of a nice way to track what happens in these movies.
Yeah. So we have a world-weary cop hero fighting hordes of bad guys in a contained environment, in this case, a hospital. Like Die Hard, it also has a love story at its center between Tequila and Teresa.
Stop. Is the love story between Tequila and Teresa, or is the love story between Tequila and Alan?
Well, my counter to that would be, is the love story in Die Hard between John McClane and Al Powell, or is it between John McClane and Holly McClane?
I think that that's a great thing to bring up, and we can talk about it in the hero section, because this movie is a bromance, and it's a
both.
Beautiful one, right?
Oh yeah,
it's just they love each other. It's a little like this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a little bromance going on. So the specifics: the bad guys plant C4 explosive devices all around the hospital and threaten to blow it up, which they eventually do. We have bad guys firing rocket-propelled grenades from the building's windows down at the cops below, as in Die Hard.
I could just watch you at your house at like 11:15 in the night, just cackling with laughter, like giddy like a schoolboy watching this movie. It's a great mental image.
Well, my story, when I watched it last Friday, you know, just digressing briefly on that.
Let's do it.
This shot begins with a typically fetishistic Woo shot of a tequila slammer being made.
What's a tequila slammer?
So tequila slammer is basically
Phil's on his third, by the
way. Tequila slammer, you pour tequila in a glass. Then you add lemonade or tonic or Sprite, whatever, 7-Up, whatever, something like that. You put a napkin on top of it, slam it down on the table. It fizzes everywhere, and you have to drink it all before it fizzes. In this scene,
a tequila slammer.
But hence the main character's name. What's amazing about that, if you look closely in the opening scene when Chow Yun-fat does that, he does his tequila slammer and then exhales cigarette smoke, meaning he must have had a drag of his cigarette, held his breath, slammed the tequila, which is no mean feat, then exhaled his cigarette smoke.
And then he plays clarinet.
Yes. And you're like, this movie is the best thing I've ever seen. My point was going to be...
Our producer, Mike, by the way, has not seen this movie, and he's sitting here, and I'm trying to picture what's going on in his head, where he's like, what is
the hell
this movie?
is going
Mike,
on in this movie?
Trust us, it all makes sense.
But my point was going to be, when I saw that like last Friday, what I was actually doing was having a tequila slammer while I watched the movie, and it was the best time of my life.
That sounds amazing. You're living.
Okay,
Die Hard DNA.
Finishing off... we have the hero jumping from an exploding building using an improvised bungee rope. That happens towards the end of the movie. And it also ends with an intimate moment between the hero, the bad guy, and a hostage being held at gunpoint, much like the standoff with McClane, Gruber, and Holly at the end of Die Hard. It also has the word hard in the title, as does Woo's next film,
Is this the first movie that actually has the title in the movie? When what's his name? The villain, the gangster.
Someone calls him... You're the hard-boiled cop or something, right?
Yeah. The gangster goes, the hard-boiled cop.
I think that in one translation, the title possibly in the native language, translates as ruthless super cop.
Yeah, you're right. It
Is
does.
that right? Yeah.
That actually was my nickname in high school, Ruthless Super Cop.
It's pretty badass. There's also, the other thing of the Die Hard thing, when this movie came out in the UK, there was a quote on the video box from Mark Salisbury of Empire magazine, who said this film was, quote, infinitely more exciting than a dozen Die Hards. And the film press compared it to Die Hard a lot. The Time Out review compared it to Die Hard. It basically said this is Woo's take on Die Hard. So it's the connections there, I would say, are
they're
pretty,
really deep,
pretty
deeper
strong.
than I sort of thought. That's interesting.
To compare this to Die Hard is almost to do it a disservice in a weird way,
Yeah.
even though that's what we're doing on this show. But this is something that stands apart, alone, and potentially even above Die Hard in terms of sheer kinetic action filmmaking.
Right.
I would counter it by saying, look. For me, there are 3 films I think of are the greatest action films of all time. Maybe there's like 5. You could say the story of Die Hard is a superior story to
Wait, what
Hard
are the
Boiled.
3 best action movies?
Well, my personal favorites
Yeah.
of the best action movies of all time would be Die Hard, Hard Boiled, The Rock, and I would put Point Break and True Lies up there.
Ooh, that's a good
And
list.
partly what I think is important about these movies is the actual how the action is filmed, the action sequences themselves, the stunts, the imagery, new images that we've never seen before. There's many more that we can talk about and debate. But I would absolutely put this film in the top 5, if not top 3, action films of all time. So in some ways, it almost does it a disservice to compare it to Die Hard, even though that's what we're doing on the show. So
It is. There's something really special, and we'll get into it because the next section of the show is called Anatomy of an Action Movie. So, Anatomy of an Action Movie is a creation of your own design, Phil.
yes,
There are 6 tenets. We live in a Twilight world, in which we discuss what makes up a good action movie. Now, we should say that the inspiration for this comes from Die Hard, these 6 tenets, because Die Hard sort of gets full marks, A+, extra credit in terms of how well it achieves the following 6 things, which are
premise / the plot, the concept and story of the movie, the ticking clock, the plot device that creates narrative tension and urgency,
and momentum.
the hero, the villain, the action itself, and humor, funny dialogue scenes, moments, or characters that add levity.
Baby peeing, whatever it happens to be. So let's start with, we talked a little bit about the story. I gave a quick little synopsis at the beginning, but what is the premise of Hard Boiled?
The most succinct encapsulation I could come up with is a tough Hong Kong cop loses his partner in a shootout with gun smugglers and vows revenge. In order to nail the powerful criminals who are responsible, he teams up with an undercover cop who's been posing as a triad assassin. When they discover the bad guys are hiding their arms cache inside a hospital, the two sides battle to the death inside the besieged building. Now, this is not a high concept film though, and it's a fairly simple plot, even though there is a lot of someone informing for this side and people swapping sides and sort of duplicity. But really the film is almost it's just non-stop action, one set piece and shootout after the next.
And when it pauses, it does it in a very enjoyable, entertaining way that's filled with humor or pathos or getting to know the characters, spend time with them. It's a beautiful sequence. We'll get into this with the heroes when Alan, played by Tony Leung's captain, remembers that it's his birthday and they have an exchange about it. It's just very, whenever there is an action, it's not like it's, let me check my phone. It's not that kind of movie. It's the characters and
if you're
characters are
checking
so
your
rich.
phone during this movie, I will personally come to your house and
You hear that, Mike?
fume inwardly outside.
Right. Yeah.
And then go home.
I will be very British about this.
Exactly. But just, put some respect on it.
yeah.
This, you were saying before, this is played at the New Beverly here in LA. If you can find this movie playing at a theater,
Have you ever seen it in the theater?
I haven't.
Me neither.
And I, oh my gosh,
I'm so annoyed
I've been
I
checking
didn't
the
go
New Beverly
last summer.
every day to find out when it's going to be on again.
Yeah.
So the ticking clock in this film, there isn't really an overriding ticking clock, but there is tension that comes from the possibility that Alan's character, who who's the undercover cop, that his true identity will be discovered by the syndicate that he's infiltrated.
And he's sort of between two syndicates. He's working for like an older, let's say more like refined, humanistic
The nice
gangster.
gangster.
What's his name?
I think it's Mr. Hoy.
Mr.
or
Hoy.
Mr. Hoy.
Yeah, and then he goes to work for another
Johnny
for
Wong.
Johnny Wong,
Yeah.
played by Anthony Wong, who's just such a bastard
Yeah.
in this movie. So he sort of like begins the film working for the kind of like humanistic gangster, which I like. I always love when there's like a nice guy gangster and then an actual bad dude kind of gangster in the movie.
There are other ticking clocks later in the film as the cops race to evacuate the patients from the hospital, including the maternity ward filled with babies. Because the bad guys, to your point, are so ruthless and reckless that they don't care about the patients or even the babies.
Well, that's interesting because I think that there's really interesting dynamics between let's not say terrorists, the gangsters in this movie, and particularly between Mad Dog, played by Philip Kwok, and Johnny Wong, which we'll get to that. But I can't overestimate the stroke of genius of putting the babies in the maternity ward at risk, because it instantly changes your investment. But also, to Woo's credit, you never feel like the babies are going to die. Like, it doesn't cross the line. There's a lot in this movie.
Sick.
Yeah.
Yes, and also there's a sort of unreality to the whole experience in a good way, where you feel this is an exaggerated world. This is like the Hong Kong as the Wild West in another universe.
Right.
You know?
I have some thoughts about that. A lot of thoughts about the violence in this movie and whether it actually feels violent to me. We'll get there. But first, let's talk about our heroes.
Please.
Oh, my God. All right, our two heroes in this movie. Inspector Tequila Yuen, played by Chow Yun-fat.
Is this the coolest character ever?
No, this is the coolest man that's ever lived. And Alan, played by Tony Leung. These are two absolutely iconic actors. Chow Yun-fat had an amazing career in Hong Kong. He was in some American movies. He was in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Mm-hmm. He's in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Ang Lee's, I think, martial arts masterpiece, along with Michelle Yeoh. And he's in a personal favorite of mine called The Corruptor, directed by James Foley. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
It's on the list.
It's yes. The Corruptor, Replacement Killers with Mira Sorvino. He was in.
That was his first, I believe, Hollywood movie. Yeah.
And Alan, Tony Leung, is very well known for his appearance in Wong Kar-wai's films. He's a wonderful actor,
hugely respected actor.
Yeah,
right?
amazing,
yeah.
and also kind of like a Jean-Louis Trintignant, who's sort of in Les Samurai, the Melville film that we discussed earlier, has that kind of detached cool as an actor, and kind of had a resurgence in the past few years because he plays the dad in Shang-Chi, the Marvel movie, and it was pretty amazing because that movie, Shang-Chi, treated Tony Leung with the kind of like, this man is an icon treatment that he deserves. Like, it's been very cool to see him have this like big cultural Marvel moment because it's like he's an icon and he's so important to the genre.
Yeah, two titans. So let's start with Tequila, who was an inspector.
I'm not a real tequila drinker.
I'm on my fourth. Let's go. What are we doing?
Let's talk about tequila.
He's an inspector with the Royal Hong Kong Police. That's his nickname because it's his tipple of choice. He also plays the clarinet in a jazz club on his off time.
As you do.
And apparently that was inspired by a real cop who was also an enthusiastic drummer when he was off duty.
So there's a moment in this movie where he goes, I wanted to be a musician, but I ended up a cop. Like, and it's just such an interesting. It's also sad. You know, it's also this.
It's funny because I was thinking about.
I knocked a bottle over in case you guys heard that. It's fine. It's fine. I just got excited. I love the clarinet.
It's funny because I was thinking, would this movie be better if he was playing like? Because when he plays the clarinet, it's very lighthearted. Actually, it's not like he's playing out his feelings,
right?
You know, like and his angst. And I was wondering, would the film be better if it was that, like playing the trumpet in a sad way or something like that, or the saxophone, but there's like real soul to it. And I thought, actually, it's kind of interesting that it doesn't do that. It's almost like a respite from
the violence. He only plays it once in the film.
Yeah, he only does it once, but that's how we meet the character.
So let's talk about him in relation to Alan, I think it'd be. So Chow Yun-fat, I would say, or I should say Tequila Yuen, is much more of the McClane character, I would say. He's a little cynical, a little bit of a wise ass, kind of detached. You know, has some joke lines in the movie, like at one point he refers to a baby as a piss pot. He doesn't
Which
take
you've called me twice today.
He doesn't take shit. It's out of love, you piss pot. He doesn't take shit, and I would say he's actually anti-authoritarian in the way that McClane is. I think he's the McClane character.
100%. The tough, rule-breaking maverick cop who goes above and beyond to exact justice on the bad guys. He's totally a McClane-type character.
He's also, one thing I think is crucial, and this was sort of the conversation about glamorization of cops, is that you don't feel that he necessarily think that he's particularly like, I love being a cop. Most is that he wants to get the bad guys.
He's just really good at it. And I think that's the same with McClane, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think McClane is like in love with being a cop. I think he hates the red tape and the bureaucracy and some of the gung-ho, bullshit. And, McClane is someone I don't think that doesn't play well with others.
Right. He's also a reluctant hero.
Yes.
And I think it's not like these are dudes, when we say things like, oh, they don't like red tape or bureaucracy, it's not because they're loose cannons. It's because they're like, I just want to get. I need
it's
to get
ineffective.
This done. Yeah,
a lot of the time, or it tangles them up with bullshit. It's interesting, because on the surface, this is a character that's almost like quite archetypal, but yet there are these interesting contradictions underneath it. Like he's hard, but he's soft at times. He sort of has a gentle side.
He's
cool.
Clarinet,
he's hot-headed,
jazzy.
At different times. Sometimes he's cool. Sometimes he's hot-headed. Sometimes he's romantic. Sometimes he's cynical, and it all gels, and it all feels like Chow Yun-fat makes that all coalesce and makes an archetypal type character something truly unique.
It's funny because in a way he could come off. He's not the strong and silent type in this movie. I actually think that's Tony. I'm sorry, Alan.
He's
played
more
by Tony
insular,
Leung.
Introverted.
But there's looks that Chow Yun-fat gives in this movie, like towards the end, especially, where you're like, "Fuck, this guy could murk me." Like he's scary,
he's a big guy as well.
He can do a Clint Eastwood face, like he can really do it. But more of the time, he's like. He has that I'm a fly in the ointment, a pain in the ass kind of quality that I think makes him so charismatic. Also, he's just an amazing actor.
He really is.
And a movie star. I mean, like the word movie star was written for dudes like him. He's
the way he can command the screen, and in A Better Tomorrow, it speaks to that because he was sort of the third lead in that film, but was so powerful and so charismatic that, spoiler alert, when in Better Tomorrow his character dies, they realize, oh fuck, we've made a huge mistake because Chow Yun-fat is the star. So for Better Tomorrow 2, they decided, oh well, he'll just have a twin brother and we'll bring back Chow Yun-fat because he's that good. And they're like, he is so just the way he can in Better Tomorrow, he can smoke a cigarette and have a matchstick in his mouth while wearing a nasty sweater and make it look cool.
Yeah, he just makes everything look cool. I mean, and I think it can't be discounted how like big of a deal he was to people paying attention to movies in this
He
time,
is truly one of my all-time favorite movie stars.
Now, I would say, though, I think Tequila makes a very strong impression in the movie. In some ways, it isn't his movie. I think it's Alan's movie, played by Tony Leung. So Alan is more the strong and silent type. He's, this movie is, it's interesting. A movie I thought a lot about while watching this was The Departed, which it's almost a false equivalency because The Departed, which is Martin Scorsese's movie about an undercover cop and criminal sort of in Boston, that's a movie about identity in a big way, but it's based on a film called Infernal Affairs. But you can feel, at least in Alan's character, this kind of like, who am I sort of feeling. And I think in some ways this movie is about Alan's redemption, in that he's been undercover for so long, he has to find his way out and feel better about the fact that he's killed people for the mob.
He's kind of a tragic character.
Yeah.
And, he has also these great characters. I love that Woo gives these characters space to breathe. We see Alan, like when he's decompressing, he lives alone on this boat and he makes an origami crane every time he kills someone.
Yeah.
So the weight of it does affect him. The guilt.
One of the last things you see in the movie is him dropping the origami figures into the water.
He also has some incredible acting moments. There was one in particular. There's a scene where he's forced to kill his old boss, Uncle Hoi, by his new boss, Johnny Wong. And there's this amazing piece of acting where it's slow motion and he smiles for Johnny's benefit as he's doing it. But as he turns away, you can see that he's absolutely devastated by it. And it's really great acting. Look, this is a film that, as you said, it isn't subtle. It's quite, it's bombastic. It's larger than life. There are huge emotions, but within that milieu, these performances are just so
They're
strong,
perfect. They're
so
so good.
striking.
There's just not a
awesome.
false note of performance anywhere in the movie. And even in the like quote unquote cheesy moments, the movie sings because Woo is such and the actors and everyone involved are such masters of filmmaking.
There was one point I wanted to just make. There was a lovely quote I came across that Woo said he believes that rather than being mere tools in a film, actors are the soul of a movie. And I think this is a soulful film.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like quasi-existential. It's somewhat philosophical. I'd love to hear more about what you were saying, like about what you think this is saying about cops. As our two leads are cops, and Woo's intention was to show the police in a positive light, but you were sort of challenging that.
It's not even that I think he's, whether it's glamour or not, but there's a line that really stuck out to me that I highlighted, which is said by Johnny Wong. He says at one point towards the end of the movie, a cop is just a human being with a gun. And what I think is really interesting about this movie, and this sort of gets into our action section, but this film begins with the first time you see Alan. He's dressed very stylishly in a suit. He walks into a library and he kills a man who's, I believe, an informant.
Yes,
which is interesting.
He cross-side. Yeah, he betrayed Mr. Hoy,
Mr.
Uncle
Hoy.
Hoy, I think. Yeah, who he's working for at the time.
And the whole film, Alan is sort of like, oh, am I a cop? Am I a criminal? Who am I? What am I? And what's so amazing about this whole movie, particularly the last hour, is I think Woo makes the action scene in the hospital a manifestation of all of the thematic shit going on in Alan's head. For one thing, at a certain point, we haven't talked about him yet, but Johnny Wong's men get dressed up as cops. And
Right.
so there are fake cops in the hospital. There are real cops outside. The fake cops in the hospital are shooting at the real cops outside. Simultaneously, Tequila and Alan's boss and several of their men go inside and pretend to be patients. So cops are hostages. Cops are criminals. Criminals are cops. No one knows who's who, and it gets increasingly chaotic until a point in the movie where Tequila and Alan take down a fake cop, and Alan puts on his cop outfit,
yeah.
and he walks into the room, and he says, "We caught a cop." And that's Tony Leung saying that to Anthony Wong, to Johnny Wong. The movie goes out of its way to constantly confuse who is who and where we are, and that culminates in Alan killing a cop by mistake, which makes him relatable to Tequila, because Tequila's like, I did that too. And it's not that I think the movie is not glamorizing cops, but it does this amazing thing where it constantly confuses you as an audience member, and kind of like, it's not clear at times who's good, who's bad, who are we shooting at. And the tragic thing is it culminates in this murder, and it relates to the larger thing where, like, in so many movies made by Hollywood or action films, hostages never die.
Yes,
Everybody dies in this movie.
Yeah.
And so, while I don't think this is like a commentary on violence, I think John Woo, it's kind of a fairy tale at times, but also he really wants to complicate what we see and how we see it, and who's good and who's bad. And he almost manifests Alan's mindset. And by the way, there's also the hero's journey, or the heroic bloodshed. And at the end of the film, Alan ends up in a cop uniform again, as like the final act of the final time
And
we sort of see him.
rediscovers his true identity,
Rediscovers
and
his
his
true
sense of
identity.
self, and
But I would argue that there's this weird, maybe I'm overthinking it, but there's this weird complexity because we don't know who's who.
Yeah.
It's really, really
it's complicated in a good way.
Yeah.
You know,
It's messy.
And there's a scene at the beginning where Tequila's friend Benny, who's his partner, who also plays the drums in the band in the jazz club.
Right.
They go to the tea house raid, and Benny who's injured at the time, ends up turning a corner and shooting at one of the bad guys, who he doesn't realize is holding a hostage as a human shield, and the hostage gets shot then.
Right.
So it isn't a sort of sanitized, everything's sort of tied up in a neat little bow.
Right.
It's fucking chaos.
Yeah.
But it's like controlled chaos.
And it's chaos
by
in
a master filmmaker.
Right. And it's chaos in a way that like makes it just not like it's palatable because it's exciting. Like John Woo is not, again, he's not like violence is bad at all, but he is sort of like, I think there's a realistic reflection of like what guns do to people in this movie, even though I would say in some ways this is the least violent movie we've ever watched, because like there's no actual mechanics of guns in this movie. People are shooting at each other from a foot away. They're killing they're like almost like using guns like swords, right? Like they never run out of bullets. No one ever runs out of bullets. It's a really fascinating sort of reflection of I think of the psychology of a character in the action of the movie. And again, you said earlier, like the greatest action movies, the action is meticulously photographed and created. I would say that John Woo, unlike almost any filmmaker, is able to reflect psychology through action filmmaking. He kind of does it in Face Off too, when Castor Troy, played by at that point played by Stephen
to your point,
John
to
Travolta,
your exact point, right?
And Nicolas Cage playing
it's a film about
Sean
confused
Archer.
identity,
right? They go to shoot each other, and they're between a mirror, and like they're looking at themselves, but they're looking at their enemy. But they like it's not that these are grand statements about identity at all, but John Woo makes these things visceral and physical and
He's
real,
clearly,
as opposed to intellectual.
it's a thematic obsession for him, for sure. I think this idea of identity and the nature of good and evil, and how perhaps they both can exist in the same person, and who are we, and and so that's why I think this is such a fascinating companion piece to Face Off, because I feel like they're his two masterpieces made at two different eras of his career.
And to put it in another way, like we referenced The Departed earlier, I think at times with The Departed, and I think The Departed is a great movie, I'm thinking about the themes of identity while I watch that movie. Watching Hard Boiled, I'm like, this shit is so entertaining, but it sort of works on you subconsciously unless you sit there and you go like, wow, he's really manifesting Alan's conflict in the final sequence of this movie. I just think it's genius.
Should we talk about the villains before
I
we move
want to
on
keep
to the
talking
action?
about this. Yeah, let's talk about the villains. Who are our villains?
So we've got Johnny Wong, played by Anthony Wong, who is the sort of upstart gangster.
Ruthless guy.
No morality, just greed and ambition. He's the charismatic leader of this syndicate that's trying to take over the arms trade and take out the old bosses. I think he's a strong villain.
Yeah.
Weasley, he's a little bit Gruber-esque in some respects, in that he's quite well dressed, and he's somewhat removed. Very greedy, grasping kind of character who's totally immoral or amoral. I think one of the cool little quirks about him, if you notice, I don't know if you picked up on this, but he in every scene he has a different color suit.
Oh, that's great. That's
great little touch.
I don't think I noticed it, but again, that's like a nice little detail.
But, I think he's a really good villain, but he's not a great villain.
Yeah.
He's not a Gruber. He's not Ed Harris in The Rock.
Well, he's not funny. Like, he lacks that kind of, like, that detachment that makes Gruber so interesting. I read about them in Time magazine. Like, he doesn't have any of that, Like, I would say that what makes Gruber compelling, I don't think Gruber is like necessarily a particularly violent person. I don't think he's in it to hurt anyone. He's certainly not going to blow a bunch of hostages away unless he's against the wall. There's a scene in this movie where which is one of, I think, the cooler scenes in terms of the villains, where Johnny Wong just kills a bunch of like essentially people who can't walk, who can't escape the hospital. And it's like, there's moments like that where he has to be that overboard.
Beyond the pale
He has to be beyond
evil,
the pale evil. But it doesn't make for like the most compelling multidimensional villain.
Well, I want to challenge you a little bit on that, because I would say there's a little distinction I would make from what you've said.
Yeah.
Because I absolutely take your point. I can't see Hans Gruber grabbing a machine gun and shooting all of the executives in the that are waiting in the in Nakatomi Plaza. But his end game was always to blow them up on the roof.
That's
the
true.
Difference is,
blow up, shoot. I don't know.
But I would say there is a difference, because Gruber would say, well, I'm not looking at that, and I'm kind of not. It's the difference between setting off a bomb and killing all the hostages, as opposed to personally grabbing a gun and shooting them while looking in the face and shooting multiple people, which is what Johnny Wong does here. And what's interesting about that, which brings us to our next villain, Mad Dog, who is Johnny's main enforcer. That moment is a turning point for his Carl. His
Carl,
henchman,
that's very good, yeah.
Right? And that's why this movie, I think he's one of the best parts of this movie, is this
Mad
character,
Dog.
Mad Dog, played by Philip Kwok, who, unusually for a henchman character, has a character arc.
Yes.
Because in the moment that we're discussing where Johnny Wong just shoots all of these poor patients who can't even walk.
Mad Dog turns on him.
Mad Dog turns on him. And even before that, he's actually tried to say, look,
Let them go.
taking on cops and other gangs, that's one thing. I'm down. But these people have got nothing to do with this. They're innocent people in the hospital. I'm not going to just kill them. And that ends up being like, I mean, again, like they had honor and,
Decency.
loyalty and morality.
Well, and what is too
you know.
far? When do you go too far? And like that's something that's thematic. Like Wu's interested in degradations of evil, right? Like Alan murders people for the mob, but he's undercover, so he has to do it to survive, right? Or whatever. Like he does a good job of making this stuff feel complex, right? And I think you said something great there, real quick, to come back to our main theme, which is Johnny Wong is to Gruber as Mad Dog is to Carl, and this movie does a good job of making the Mad Dog, sort of the main physical adversary of Tequila and Alan.
And he's
until
more
he isn't.
interesting, I think, actually, than Johnny Wong. Although I think Johnny Wong is a really good character and a really good performance. But the Mad Dog is like, what an awesome character. You just never see a henchman have moments like that where they're like, hold on, boss, this is too far. Usually the henchmen go even further than the villain. Look at Gary Busey in Lethal Weapon, you know? Like they leave in like, oh, the bad guy's dead by the end of the second act. So he's like, right, fuck it, I'll take it to the next level and go to the
Mr. Joshua.
go to Danny Glover's house.
It's start goddamn
shit.
Christmas. Yeah.
So this is a fantastic evolution of the henchman archetype. Philip Kwok is a really important figure as well in Hong Kong cinema.
And big kudos to him for doing a ton of really strong acting facially with one of his eyes covered for a huge runtime in the movie.
Great character.
He is really good.
So, should we talk about the section? Or roll up your sleeves.
All right, this is a 10-hour pod. Should we pause and just go watch the movie and then come back? Or should we watch the movie?
Don't worry, it's playing on a constant loop in my head anyway, so we're all good.
Yeah, Phil has a t-shirt that just shows the movie. It's plugged into a battery pack he carries around. The fifth tenet of the anatomy of an action movie, the action. So let's list the key action sequences in this movie. The opening tea house shootout, which includes the sliding down the banister moment. The raid on the warehouse at the docks with the motorcycle. Tequila abseiling? I don't know what that is. While firing. Oh, when he swings
in swinging,
firing
from above in the warehouse.
Right,
yeah,
he's firing
an MP5.
But the extended hospital battle, and included in that is the one-take action sequence, which is 2 minutes and 42 seconds. Look, Phil, I think we can dive into a whole bunch of these things, but I think we should start with this question. Is John Woo the greatest action director of all time?
I would say he is the greatest director of action sequences of all time. Now, I'd say like my list that I had of like for the Hall of Fame, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but on that list I would have James Cameron, Michael Bay, Catherine Bigelow, Tony Scott, John McTiernan, Christopher Nolan, Ridley Scott, George Miller.
Christopher Nolan, interesting. Not
Akira Kurosawa.
It's Akira Kurosawa. Akira
maybe
Kurosawa.
Gareth Evans might be trying to get in
Gareth
there.
Evans
right?
is good.
But for me, and you could argue they've made superior movies in the action space, but no, I don't think any of those filmmakers, and they'll probably say to this themselves, and I think they're all geniuses who I worship.
Yeah.
But have any of them directed a sequence like the assault on the warehouse by the motorcycles in this movie?
Very Kill Bill.
Very Kill Bill. They're raiding the gun arsenal in the docks.
Right.
And the camera is sort of pulling back as the motorcycle. They're
that's
in a sort of triangular
and it's so
formation.
Well lit. Yeah.
And as they go, and there's sparks going and girders, and just it's like a feast for the eyes. It's so dazzling what's happening. And the dynamic camera work and the music, which we haven't even talked about.
Yeah, music rocks.
The music in this movie.
I think the biggest takeaway from me for this, in general, is all this action, is that John Woo, I watch these films with awe in how they're covered and edited, and like it feels like it took 6 years to shoot this movie because it's all analog, as you've said before. It's not a green screen movie like a lot of movies are made that now, right? Like everything is real. Things that are on fire. There's practically no digital effects. It's all, actors falling and diving and somehow surviving, doing actual things with their bodies. Like squibs going off. A squib is the unit that you wear in your body that a stunt actor or actor would wear in their body to make it look like they're being shot. It's unbelievable. masterpiece.
And it culminates, with this one take action sequence this is one of the things that this movie is largely known for, which is this 2-minute, 42-second single take action sequence where our two heroes move from an elevator through the corridor once they're in the hospital, and there's no cuts. And there's no even hidden
Looks
cuts.
like a video game, like we talked about before.
And there's explosions and stunts and people crashing through windows. It's like you could take a year to set up that shot.
Yeah, it'd probably take a week, 2 weeks to shoot that.
I mean, it's this movie. I just don't even know how to articulate.
I think the other thing to say about that's amazing is that it's Chow Yun-fat and Tony Leung actually doing that sequence, which I think is just unbelievable. And it's hard to make a movie like this anywhere in the world. It's just so amazingly realized.
What I think of when I see this movie as well, right? Is like it's like a dream that was beamed from another planet that was bottled.
Right. For
and
Phil
we get to
Gotham's
have it.
amusement, yeah.
We get to have it.
Right.
And we get to watch it whenever we want. And it's like a gift from God, this movie. It truly feels like, it feels like it came from another universe.
Right.
It's just it's so exotic.
Yeah.
And because the styles and the imagery is so different from Western cinema, even though there are some of those influences in there that like we talked about, but it feels just so like this is a world I just want to live in, and I find so seductive, and it's a phantasmagoria. It's just so the neon and the motorcycles and Hong Kong at night, and the story is so strong and the characters are so strong. It's just like, to me, this is everything cinema. It's cinema at its zenith.
It's incredible. I think we would be remiss if in the sequence on action, we didn't talk about the moment in the film when Chow Yun-fat slides down the banister with 2 guns in hand. It's a little embarrassing we've gotten this far into a podcast about John Woo without mentioning a guy with 2 guns doing anything, because that is a iconic image of John Woo's filmmaking, which is he loves guys with 2 guns. He loves to, they're shooting. Amazingly, they're able to hit things while shooting hit different targets while shooting with 2 guns at the same time. Look, I think a thing that's interesting to reflect on this is that often in action movies, particularly made maybe in Hollywood, the guns are like people far away from each other shooting. Right? But they're up close, they're personal. The guns are almost like swords. They're used like weapons. It's a completely different kind of, that's why they call it gun fu. There's a completely
fists
different...
almost.
Fists,
it's almost like an extension of the
body.
body.
It's up close, it's personal. Yeah. People get shot at point blank range, like on the reg. Whereas I feel like in a lot of movies made in the US, it's like that moment where you shoot someone in the, like right up close is like the climax. It's a really personal moment. Like the movie The Rookie. I don't know if you think of it. That culminates in someone getting shot like clean in the forehead. And it feels like the climax. Whereas like on the reg, people get shot in the face in this movie like every 13 seconds. It's like unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, it's. I agree with your list of action directors. I think it's an incredible list. I think in terms of the ability to do something practically that looks unbelievable, John Woo is untouched. No one quite gets there. James Cameron is an example of a guy who's really embraced digital effects and has, tirelessly worked to integrate them seamlessly with practical material. Whereas I feel like John Woo, particularly in this era, was like, nope, we're doing all of it for real. And I think that is amazing and not something you see that much.
And by the way,
at the level that this is made at, there's still a lot of good action movies being made that are practical, but this might be the greatest achievement of that.
Yes, I'm no notes.
No, well said. The humor. So this is a funny movie.
There is a lot of
funny in like a
charming,
unorthodox.
There's a couple of bits that I noticed. The bit where Tequila is in the police station and he prays to General Quan, which is the Taoist god of war, I believe.
Right.
I looked into what that was. I hope I'm getting that correct. To help his relationship, with Teresa Mo. And he also said, "Oh, and I'd really like a flat too, because he's got a problem like with where he lives, and he can't afford the rent, or he's got this kind of domestic problem." I think that those moments are, and it's not, and that's the other thing I wanted to make about this. I don't just love this movie because the action is the best action that's ever been filmed in the history of cinema.
Right.
Right. It's also those moments.
The character
the
moment.
music, the soul, the heart, the unabashed sentimentality of this movie works for me. You know, and those little moments where it's also slightly self-effacing, where he's praying for something really profound, like I really need to fix my relationship with the woman I love, but also throwing a flat.
Can I get a flat as well? You know, it's funny you bring that up because it's not a comparison that I thought about until this moment, but there's a little bit in Chow Yun-Fat's humor and facial expressions that remind me, like performance-wise, of Toshiro Mifune, the star of many Akira Kurosawa films, in that they have this kind of similar deep-hearted cynicism, but also the ability to undercut. You know, I'm thinking particularly of Mifune in Seven Samurai, where he plays Kikichiro, and he's kind of the guy in the group who's sort of the emperor has no clothes guy, where he looks at the situation and goes like, well, this is absurd. Like he's a truth teller. There's like a kind of quality to Chow Yun-Fat's performance in this in particular, where he's kind of like the wise ass who says it as he sees it. And also there's a scene in the movie where he's trying to protect a baby, and he's singing to the baby while he's shooting bad guys at the same time. He's like singing a lullaby, and he puts cotton balls in the baby's ears. So he's like, it's a great juxtaposition of like this loving maternal moment with like, I got to blow these dudes away. Like it's that heroic bloodshed thing. It's really, really
it's a combination of innocence, and purity in this world of, violence and, gangsters and criminality and cops shooting people and yet, but these babies. And I mean, that's the music in those sequences. Some people might, I don't know that John Woo, I think is a very sentimental director in the best possible way. That scene is an interesting progenitor to the scene in Face Off where the kid is
listening?
Gina Gershon's kid is listening on the headphones to
Somewhere Over the Rainbow, sung by John Travolta's co-star in Grease, Olivia Newton-John. Rest in peace.
While a huge shootout is going on around them, and it's the same idea of like innocence in the midst of this madness.
Not subtle, but powerful.
Yeah,
great.
And I love that. Yeah, he's going for it.
Speaking of not subtle, there's a scene in this movie where Chow Yun-Fat is on fire, trying to jump out a window, and at that moment, a baby pees and puts out the fire. And to this movie's credit, it's so earned. It's ridiculous, but you're like, yep, this is something that happens in this world. And I think that is...
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic.
It's so charming and funny and just brilliant, and just the sort of gleeful absurdism of this movie. It almost puts a cherry on the sundae of the whole thing, of just like, this movie is so crazy, but it wears its heart on its sleeve.
Yeah.
And gosh, the stuff with the babies is so moving to me.
Yeah, and it's also just funny in this very particular kind of
like... It's cute and yeah, the juxtaposition, I suppose, of the extreme violence with the total opposite of like
innocent little babies,
innocent, pure, cute lives. Is just it. I mean, it's just an incredible cocktail.
Yeah. Speaking of cocktails. Should we get a cocktail and head over to our Die Hard Oscars?
Yeah, let's get the perm.
Look at me.
Let's get the perm sorted out.
I'm very proud of that transition, guys. I'm very proud of it. Let me introduce let me just have a quick sip of my tequila slammer. Little clarinet. The Die Hard Oscars, or the Action Movie Awards, is when we pick some of our favorite aspects of the movie, named after some iconic characters from the film Die Hard. So the first award... I'll give the name of the award, and Phil will list the nominees. The John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line.
Yeah,
Phil, the nominees are...
And we've tweaked this because this used to be the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Quip. But as we're discovering, interestingly, not all of these action films have those kind of...
not all lines are
kiss-off lines.
Yeah, that's true.
Sometimes they're a little bit more philosophical or soulful, or just something other than like something you would say after you throw an axe into somebody's chest.
I'm very excited to hear... What movie has an axe thrown in someone's chest?
I want to say Under Siege 2, but I could be wrong.
Oh, it's going to be Eric Bogosian forever. I'm really excited to hear your nominees for Best Line for this film.
All right, I've got 3.
Now, we should say this is a film not in English, so we are working with translated versions. So if we're incorrect here, we're sorry.
Apologies.
We're doing the best
and actually,
we can.
the 2 different versions I saw, actually, the English translations were actually quite substantially different. So,
interesting.
Yeah. the three I've got are translated thus in the version that I saw. Give a guy a gun and he's Superman. Give him two and he's God. And that is said critically. That is a criticism made by Superintendent Pang, the boss, the police.
Oh, I
the
love
police
that guy.
captain,
That actor's wonderful.
to Tequila, and he's criticizing Tequila for going too far and killing a guy that he's been after he killed his partner. I think that these sort of speaking to some of the themes of the movie. The other one that I thought was really good was most things go in and out of style, with the exception of war, of course.
Ooh,
which
that
said
is good.
by the arms dealer Johnny Wong, the main villain.
That's good.
And then when Tequila and Alan meet on the boat, and Tequila has him at gunpoint, he says to him, "Could we ever be friends?" And Alan responds, "You've got the gun. You can tell me to go milk a cow, and I'll do it."
I have.
That was pretty great.
Those are great. I have three entries.
Okay.
And they're two of them are funny, and then one is a little more serious. Best line: "I've got more hostages than you've had hot dinners." Which is in the version, at least in the subtitles that I saw. Johnny Wong says that. At one
wow!
point.
I don't know if I got that in my version.
When Tequila says to the baby, "You saved the day, you little piss pot," when he pisses and puts out the fire, I thought it was a great line. And then another one that is thematically interesting. After Alan mistakenly kills a cop, Chow Yun-fat says, "You're your own worst enemy," and I think that's a nice sort of reflection on the themes of the movie, similar to a cop is just a human being with a gun, where it's kind of like there are cops, there are criminals, and sort of, who's who, but also the tortured state of Alan's mind, I think is that's a good interesting thing that Chow Yun-fat says, which is actually kind of about Chow Yun-fat and his sort of, or I should say Tequila, and his guilt around the death of his partner.
You know what you're saying about Johnny Wong's line, I do think is very interesting. It actually dimensionalizes his character. The line you're saying about a cop is just a human being with a gun, because what he seems to be saying there, if you unpack that, is if you move the societal constructs.
Yes.
That say this is a criminal and this is a cop and this person has power, you could just say, well, the badge is just a piece of metal. It's meaningless.
And that's that complicates the idea of glamorizing the police to me, because it's in some ways he's saying there's an arbitrary distinction between these two.
Yeah,
things.
it's basically just war.
Yeah,
like someone says it's all about strength and power
and what's the
will.
War line?
Will.
What's the war line that you just the best line?
Most things go in and out of style with the exception of war, of course. So actually, that's kind of like bringing me round a bit more on Johnny Wong. And that's one of the things, I think this film is deceptively deep in an
totally
odd way.
Agree.
We think, because it's so superficially thrilling and exhilarating and visually stunning, but I know there's something underneath it that's like, the foundations of this movie are robust.
Well, John Woo just knows how to entertain the shit out of you and sort of sneak some really smart things into what he does. I think Face Off does the same thing. I also think he's interested in, again, degradations of bad, if so to speak. I'm going to go with a cop is just a human being with a gun, because I think it's a pretty interesting line. What's your choice?
Well, now that you've said that, and now that we've said, I think that because that gives extra texture to that character, I would agree.
Ooh, look at me. Thank you. But I really like, I've got more hostages than you've had hot dinners.
That one, I think that there's I think it was translated by someone British, because there's a lot of British slang in that one. There was one, and when I was watching it this morning in the British one, and it was like, "You've got sweet FA to do with such and such."
That was in my version.
Did you know what that means?
No.
It means fuck all. That's a total Britishism.
I've never heard FA before.
Yeah, sweet fuck all, meaning like nothing.
So,
weird.
Should I introduce our next category?
Yes.
The Hans Gruber Award. The Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. The nominees are
Philip Chan as Superintendent Wang, Tequila's boss. Fun fact, that actor was actually an ex-cop.
I love that. He's like the Dennis Farina of Hong Kong.
Yeah, totally. And you right, 100%. Teresa Mo as Teresa Chang, Tequila's girlfriend, and also fellow police officer. John Woo as the bartender.
Mr. Woo.
Tequila's friend and mentor
the
at the jazz
philosophical
club.
former cop bartender.
Philip Kwok as Mad Dog, Johnny Wong's top enforcer. Honorable mention, the little baby in the hospital that Tequila protects. Did you see how cute he was?
He's very cute. I have a 3-month-old, so I'm babied up.
Yeah, I get that. I get that.
My choice is Teresa Mo. Absolutely. And actually, I forgot to bring this up in our Anatomy of an Action Film, but I think John Woo and the team, everybody involved, does an amazing job of sort of playing with the idea that, like, all she wants is a baby. She just wants, like, it kind of like for a moment, you're like, oh, this could just be another sexist portrayal of a woman in a movie, but she's a badass. She's smart. And the movie gives her, from the beginning, but really allows her to evolve into this, like, as important to the operation character as anyone else. And I love her. I think she's great. I think their relationship is never reductive. And I like that they set up the idea that Tequila has met his match in this woman who, again, on a superficial level is kind of like, she's a lady in a suit. She's like almost set up as like an administrative assistant, but then she kills a guy for slapping her in the face and like saves a bunch of babies. Like she's instrumental. I also, as a side note, love that this movie has a whole thing about saving people being as important as killing bad guys. I think that adds dimensionality to the movie in a big way because like heroic bloodshed, right? What's your?
I won't disagree. Actually, again, I really love her in it, and the more I watch it, the more I love her. It's a real subtle, quite a delicate performance, in which I think you need a different energy in the midst of all this machismo and ultraviolence to have her grace in the middle of this and her sort of sweetness, but at the same time, as you're saying, when push comes to shove and she is slapped by one of the bad guys, she shoots him point blank.
It's just very far from the damsel in distress that you often see, and similar to Holly McClane. There's like a real cunning to the character. Should we talk about our next award?
Yes.
The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie. The nominees are...
I only have one nominee.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's Johnny Wong. There's really not... He's just such a piece of shit.
He sucks.
Maybe
it's that baby. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, let's go with
that's
Johnny
your own
Wong.
Deal. Like, I know you haven't slept in a while.
Baby.
Don't take it out.
What if my choice was actually the baby?
Baby's a fucking asshole.
That baby's crying. He pees on that guy's nice suit.
No, there's not a lot of
Johnny Wong.
Yeah, it's just.
I don't even want to talk about
cut and dry.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about Best Death presented by Markle. No more.
Where do we start? I have got 5.
Oh my God! All right, give them to me.
All right. The scene in the opening in the tea house shootout where a flour-covered tequila executes the gangster at point blank range and the blood splatters over him. That was pretty powerful. Alan killing the guy in the library with the gun hidden in the book.
Ooh, that's good.
Pretty cool scene. Tequila jumping over the sliding motorbike and then shotgunning another motorcyclist while in midair in slow motion. I'm like, yes, hook it to my soul and inject it into me forever.
I forgot about that.
So amazing. There's some great motorcycle stuff in Hard Target as well. I can't wait to get to that.
I've never seen Hard Target.
Oh boy, you're in for a treat. It's awesome.
I'm mixed on Jean-Claude Van Damme, if I'm totally honest.
It's his best movie.
Oh, that's good.
It's his best movie. He's great in it. It totally works. Teresa shooting the guy who slaps her in the maternity ward, and Johnny Wong taking a bullet in the eye at the end in the final standoff.
I am going to go with something different.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Tony shooting himself and Johnny Wong to put him on the ground. It's not his death, but it leads to his death because, again, I think thematically it's compelling that he's like, I'm going to kill myself to kill the bad guy because I am the bad. Like, he has to shoot himself to manifest, he has to create his own origami figure in order to escape his own what he's created, the shadow that he's created in the world.
As a mini metaphor, now that's genius. I had actually picked up on that. That's a really cool reading of.
In a way, he dies. You think he's dead until the final shot. Like, you're like, oh, that guy's dead. He sacrificed himself. And I mean, wisely, I think they keep him alive. But you can argue he's a different person. He sheds himself of the murder, which I think is philosophically interesting. He says, I'm not a killer anymore, whether he is or not.
It's almost like he had to do that to redeem himself or to be
it's a redemption
reborn.
Story.
Yeah, it is a redemption story. Again, like, you're really convincing me on all of these this week. So.
I really found a lot in this movie that I thought was really rich.
Me
beyond
too.
Just kicking ass. I mean, this movie kicks ass, but it's philosophically dense.
I find it haunting. The music in the scenes where Alan is reflecting on his guilt, and I find that music so haunting. And the funeral for Benny at the beginning.
That's a really Michael Kamen-esque score. That sort of jazzy, bluesy kind of feeling. It made me think of Michael Kamen a little bit.
The music, by the way, is by Michael Gibbs, and honestly, again, a bit of too much TMI. I'll fucking drive around LA listening to that
Heck
shit.
yeah, baby.
I did it last night. I'm driving by like refineries at night and just listening to it and wishing I was in the world of Hard Boiled, man. I love this movie, and the music is a huge part of it.
Let's quiz it out. This is gonna be hard. I have a feeling it's gonna be hard. Let's go.
All right. Excuse me. Woo-hoo-hoo. Double
Hey,
Jeopardy.
Phil just turned 13, guys. It's cool.
Yeah.
But,
I've had too much
actually,
fizzy
here's
pop.
what's happened.
I've had too many cakes and sugar. I'm too excited.
Phil has gone so far in revisiting this classic from his childhood that he's, in fact, his voice is dropping again.
Look, my inner 13-year-old child like runs the show anyway.
Yeah.
So, it's you've seen Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right?
Oh my God.
Krang.
I love
like
Teenage
that's
Mutant
my
Ninja
inner
Turtles.
child pulling the levers for me.
Which Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle are you? You're
I don't know.
I have a lot of thoughts about this.
that's another pause.
You sometimes you're a Raphael, but sometimes you're a Michelangelo.
Yeah, today I'm Michelangelo.
Yeah,
I'd say.
you would be.
All right, so double Jeopardy quiz / trivia. Well, the scores can really change.
Ooh.
All right, and remember, this is for our listeners at home.
All right,
So don't feel too
by the way,
bad.
that's Phil's
Don't
way of
feel
telling me
too
to take a
bad.
pause before I answered the question if I know the answer, because I'm everybody's.
And also not to beat yourself up if you don't.
Okay, thanks.
I don't want you
Thanks,
to be
Dad.
upset.
Aww.
All right. Question number 1. In our Die Hard 2 episode, we discussed the fact that film had the highest body count of any major movie at that time, largely due to the plane crash. However, Hard Boiled has an even higher body count, even without a plane crash. Can you guess the body count?
This is a little funny because I was literally editing this episode this week. That episode this week.
Within a range of 10, either way.
It's within a range.
I'll give you within a range of 10.
300.
It's 307, so yay!
It had to be at least 300.
Well done.
I just want to point out that there's no mass death in this movie. Like, there's no plane crash. A bus doesn't explode.
Exactly.
This is all
There are 2 plane
individual-
crashes in Die Hard 2,
This
and
is
this
all-
has more a higher body count. with nothing like that.
Oh
just
my
by
goodness.
individuals being shot.
If that's not an advertisement for action fans to watch this movie,
Incredible.
I don't know what is.
All right, question number 2. Which Malaysian actress and action goddess, currently having one of the biggest moments of her career, was originally supposed to play the role of Teresa?
Get out, really? Michelle Yeoh.
Yes.
I love Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
amazing. She deserves all of the good positive vibes coming her way. What an amazing actress.
Absolutely. Question number 3.
Yes.
Chow Yun-fat was reportedly offered a key role in The Matrix, but decided to turn it down. Can you guess which part he was originally offered?
Morpheus.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, of course.
Makes sense, right?
Oh
and
my
it
God.
goes to show how much the Wachowskis must have
Yeah.
loved, these movies and how influential they were on their body of work, particularly The Matrix.
Love the Matrix movies. All 4. I think they're great. Morpheus.
You got 100% this week.
I did.
3
Well,
out of 3.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Congrats.
you. I remember reading about the Morpheus thing and thinking that would be real. No disrespect to Lawrence Fishburne, who's incredible in that movie.
Yeah, absolutely awesome, and it all worked out. But you can, in an alternative universe, you can see how that would have also worked.
Matrix, hugely influenced by Hong Kong cinema.
Absolutely,
Ugh,
yeah.
Great
Absolutely.
movie.
This is a hugely influential movie.
I love it. All right.
Final thoughts.
I think we've covered.
No, we're just getting started.
This is just a all out not only action masterpiece. I don't want to just say that this movie is a great action movie. It's just a great movie. It's cinematic. It's fluid. It's beautiful. It's big hearted. John Woo, just an informative figure in I think the lives of people that love movies like this, and hopefully all movies. And give the man a Lifetime Achievement Award. That's all.
I just find this film. It's so inspiring, it sparked again my true love of cinema and like why I've dedicated my life to this medium, because this is the pinnacle of what can be achieved. That combination of visuals and characters that you love, going on an adventure, and the soulful underpinnings and the mood and the music. It's just everything that I love about this art form.
It's just so energizing. Well,
the last thing I wanted to say was get this film out on Blu-ray, and whoever is controlling the rights to this, you are like doing a huge disservice to people, because this film is so hard.
It's hard to
get
find.
hold
You
of.
can find
There
it.
is a way you can find it.
Its lack of availability on a physical or on a streamer is crazy.
It's a
crazy.
crime.
It's a crime. It's a crime. You bastards. Listen, I think that about does it. Listen, if you have a friend that loves John Woo, or if you have a friend who hasn't seen Hard Boiled, Mike Mayer, our producer. Recommend this to them. Tell them to see it. Also tell them to listen to the show. We've got a whole nice back catalog we're building on Die Hard, The Hunt for Red October, License to Kill, Roadhouse, a million movies we talked about. Narrow Margin. If you haven't found those ones, go back and listen to them. You can find us on Twitter. Phil, where are you these days on the internet? Where can we find you?
If Twitter is a party, I'm skulking in the shadows, nervously sipping a pint.
But he's blue checked. He's blue checked.
You can
so
find me under my name, Philip Gawthorne, on Twitter.
And I'm at Liam G. Billingham on Twitter, probably complaining about French cinema. That's who I am. We're also on Instagram at DieHardOAB, also on Twitter at DieHardOAB. And you can email us questions, comments, concerns, thoughts at diehardoab@gmail.com. If you want to get in touch, let's tell us what you think of the movies. Also, please, if you haven't, click the subscribe button, rate the show, review the show. We've gotten some good reviews. We should start reading those reviews on the show. Let's start doing it.
Yeah.
Our moms deserve to be heard. The funny thing about that is I'd have to be like, no, Mom, I'll write it for you. Yeah, I know you don't know how to get on Apple Podcasts. Phil, what's next on the show?
Next time we are doing Patriot games.
Ooh. Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
Harrison Ford, my guy. Lots to unpack. Can't wait to talk about it. I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm Philip Gawthorne.
We will be back next time with some new FBI guys, I guess. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast hosted and written by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Please rate, review, and subscribe and follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Special thanks to Suki Chu and the whole team at Sugar 23. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.